Welcome to the Into AI Safety podcast, where we discuss the challenges facing the field of AI safety and those who work within it. This show aims to provide the foundation and resources needed to get up to speed on safe and ethical AI. As always, I am your host, Jacob Hames. During the podcast, you may hear this sound, which denotes that I have included at least one link related to the content that preceded the sound. The purpose of this is to allow for citations and providing resources without breaking the flow of conversations. As per usual, items mentioned during asides will have links in the show notes as well. This episode was recorded in April 2024. Additional audio was recorded February of 2025. I know it's been a long time, don't at me. Hey everyone, hope you like the new intro, and sorry for the incredibly long delay on this one. Since my last episode with Igor, quite a few things have happened, but I'll get into that another time. For now, I'm excited to share this interview with Tristan Williams and Felix de Simone, which I did last year in late April. These guys were extremely courteous with me not getting the episode out when I thought I would originally, and are also just fun to hang out with and talk to. Before we get started, I just wanted to clarify that both Tristan and Felix were joining the podcast in a personal capacity, and their views do not reflect those of their employers. Now, I totally botched the intro here, so we're just going to kick it off with Felix's answer.
Sure. Well, first of all, Jacob, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be on. So a bit more about me. I'm a former environmental advocate. I got my start in environmental policy advocacy and did that for about a year, working on both the state and federal level to advance environmental policies. More recently, I got involved with AI policy. I joined Tristan's project under AI Safety Camp, and I got a chance to work on that for a few months. And then more recently began working as the organizing director for Pause AI, which is a grassroots movement dedicated to preventing the development of AI more powerful than humans until we know how to make it safe. Broadly, I'm interested in empowering citizens to make their voices heard regarding their concerns on AI, and in ensuring that AI policy is actually treated by our elected officials with the level of urgency that it requires.
Nice, awesome. And Tristan, what about you?
Yeah, so I've taken a bit of a winding road. But was pretty unsure of what to do for a while. Sort of got into studied psychology and philosophy in my undergraduate years, and got into some sort of research assistant stuff then. So I started out working in the meditation research space. And then, I've been able to just sort of continue from there, working on some different projects, contracting with some other organizations in the AI safety space for some brief periods of time. So with the Center for AI Safety, for example. And then I basically wound my way up at the Center for AI Policy, where I am helping out part-time as a research assistant now, working on doing some of the background research for our reports.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. And so the reason I want to have you guys on, particularly because of your project with AI Safety Camp, and so you were the project lead, Tristan, right?
Right.
And so that means that you came up with the idea. You, at least in this iteration of AI Safety Camp, you came up with the idea, you applied to be a research lead with like the proposal for this project, and then you directed the team in executing on this project. Can you give us a little bit of insight into like how you came up with the idea, and then what that initial process was like for getting into that position?
Yeah, for sure. So, what motivated the project is fairly simple. I was having a conversation with someone else working in the AI safety space, and they the sort of thing that they wanted to focus on was making videos on social media to engage the sort of public at large with sort of education about risks from AI and just trying to generally raise awareness. And he basically said, like, look, I've got a ton of ideas for videos. Like, I've already thought about that. I already feel prepared to start on that side of things. But the sort of bottleneck for me right now, the thing that I can't, the thing that's keeping me from starting on this project is I don't know where to direct people when they're done. I don't know what call to action I can place at the end of my video so that this isn't just oh, cool, like, maybe I should worry about AI and then people move on. Yeah,
Yeah.
it seems simple to just like sort of throw something out there and then have it, like not really sort of fully connect or not give people a conduit to follow up on it or something like that.
Right.
So I basically so he was like, is there anything you know of? And I was like, oh, like maybe you could point them towards some of the bills that are going on in Congress, but then it's not really clear what people do even if they see that stuff's going on in Congress that they could support. Like
I don't know.
Yeah, it seems hard. And then I kept thinking about this a bit because I was like, I wasn't fully satisfied with the answer that I gave him. And after doing some looking, like I realized that I just don't think that there's like a very good like call to action for just the sort of, I don't think there's a very good call to action in the AI safety space for people that do not want to involve themselves, super deeply. For people who are concerned, but like this is one of 30 concerns they have, or for people who, are like concerned but maybe still a bit skeptical and like don't really have time to like dig deep into it now, but would be glad to contribute a little bit. There's this large segment out there, I think, of people who could be engaged, but just there isn't anything good to sort of get them involved in right now. There's no
this sort of like all or nothing kind of mentality of like either you got hooked and you're in and you're gonna be doing a lot to focus on this, or you're not, and then like maybe you can't really do much. And I think that's not true, and clearly you guys think that's not true as well. But there aren't many resources for those people either.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's like a lot of other social movements which have wanted to like focus on like broad outreach to the public. Like they do have something to fill in here. Like it's not just like we can't only have a hook. We've got to have some smaller way to engage. And so basically that was the impetus for the project. Was just thinking, it was me just sort of thinking more about this and then saying eventually, oh wait, like maybe this like other thing that we have of constituents, so people sort of communicating with their members of Congress, maybe this is a useful thing that we could look into for its potential. And I didn't find that much out there, but that, knowing that this is something that is often deployed in by other sort of advocacy groups as a way to engage sort of, I think, a similar group of people.
Okay. Yeah. And so just before we, I guess, move on to the like application side, can you give us the I don't know, elevator pitch or short version of what your project was aiming to do?
Yeah, so the elevator pitch, the short version is we wanted to sort of find something that could fill this space, something that could give people a tangible action that they could take to help address the risk from AI. And I guess sort of that is the goal. And then to do that, the way in which we focused was doing some research into what the effectiveness of messaging your congressional member is.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. And then around the same time that you're thinking about this, Felix and I had just met in the AI governance course run by Blue Dot Impact. And so near the end of that is when we would have been, or rather when we were, because I also applied for various different projects. So what was that decision like for you, Felix? Like, how did you find out about it? What made you think, oh, this project, because how AISC is set up, there's like a ton of projects. I think this year there were like 35 or more or something like that. And you're supposed to pick your top one out of all those. And there's a disclaimer that, like, if you don't put it as your top one, you might not get viewed by certain leaders, because some people get tons of applicants and some people don't get as many. So, it's sort of like a numbers game. How did you decide, like, okay, here are the ones that I want to apply for, and this is the one that I feel is most impactful, or I want to be working on for the next couple months?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this was my top one. Just to clarify, Tristan, this is my number one choice.
Ooh.
It was.
Okay.
Yeah, I said it was my number one choice.
Oh, I thought you said it wasn't.
No. This was my top choice. And the reason it was my top choice is because it seems like such an obvious low-hanging fruit, getting citizens involved in the AI policy advocacy space. So, a bit more of my reasoning here, right? I mentioned this already, but my background is in environmental advocacy, right? I've run grassroots statewide movements to try to advance environmental policy. I've kind of experienced firsthand the importance of getting citizens involved in these things. And so when I learned over the course of last year more about AI safety and took the AI safety fundamentals course and learned more about policy recommendations, one of the first things that came to mind was like, why aren't more people doing something about this, right? It just seems like such an obvious low-hanging fruit that more people need to start picking, so to speak. Another consideration here, again, coming from the history of social change movements, is that even if you have really good and really robust policy proposals, that's not enough on its own, right? Like, you can have the best policy proposals in the world, but if you don't have people taking that seriously, they're just going to get neglected. So you need to have people on the outside pushing elected officials to prioritize AI safety and to act on this.
Or
and
money.
So,
right?
Or
you could
money,
also
but
just throw money at it, right?
Yes, but that's another part of the problem, is that we're up against some of the most powerful companies on Earth, right? They're going to outspend us by like probably several orders of magnitude, right? So Microsoft, Meta, Google, I think each spent more than $10 million in the last congressional session. They have like armies of dozens of full-time lobbyists, right? The best way, or one of the best ways for us to counteract that influence, is to have citizen outreach and to be able to convince our elected officials by just sheer numbers of citizens contacting them that they need to take AI safety seriously.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, so you got onto this project, and I guess the next step is sort of to both of you. The rest of this interview is more to both of you now that we've sort of aligned the timelines. What was, I guess, like the overall trajectory of the project? Like, I guess maybe plans, and then, or just like milestones that happened, and then maybe we'll go more in depth into different parts of that.
Yeah, at a pretty broad level, the application process for being a research lead played out over a couple of months. So, yeah, developing the idea came a fair bit before the project actually started, and then sort of went through further refinement with some other sort of commenters that AI Safety Camp will bring in, just to sort of clarify your idea a bit. Once the idea was live and everyone was brought in, the first focus of the project was sort of starting at a basic level of like evaluating specifically, can constituent communication with their members of Congress be an effective way to address this problem.
And just to make sure that I'm understanding here, when you say constituent communication, can you just give like a imagine that I am 5.
Yes.
And then talk to me like I'm 5, because that's more accurate to what's really happening. So
yeah, we've debated on what the best tagline is for this, because we use constituent communication because we want to be clear that what we're focusing on here is basically people who reside in the state or district of their representative in U.S. Congress, them sending or getting into contact with their member of Congress. And so we say constituent communication because it's not just, this is inclusive not just of sending an email or a letter, this is also inclusive of giving a phone, making a phone call. It's also inclusive of like sitting down for a meeting. So it's broadly sort of any of these routes of communication that are open to you.
If I was a 5-year-old, I would have left by now. But I get it. I do get it. I get it. But yeah, yes. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, I failed the 5-year-old. To the 5-year-old, I say there are people who are supposed to represent you, and this is your way of looking at the effectiveness of if you tell them stuff. Do they actually listen, and does that actually bring about change?
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. I mean, I got the first one, but the second one definitely clarified things a little bit, so I think that's good. And then, what was that was the first, I guess, question. How long, what did you do to answer that question? What did that look like?
Yeah, so we had... for this part of the project, we were a bit more segmented. We had some people coming in with connections to various staffers, and we had some people, and that was both at the state and federal level. So one sort of group of us was sort of responsible for, getting in contact with these people and trying to get their sort of, insights on it. And then on the other side of things, we were just sort of doing more typical, just sort of looking at what is the academic literature that has been put out on this subject, and just doing a really exhaustive search for anything relating to this topic.
Gotcha. And did you focus on either one specifically, or were you just like running both?
No, this is actually perhaps a useful place where we kind of where we can segment this, because Felix did a bit of the research, but was more on the talking side, and I was more over on the research side, just because that's more of my specialty.
Gotcha. So let's then, just because of the order, go to Felix. What was this portion like for you? Like, explain to me more what it means and what your plan was to get to the conclusions that you're looking for.
Right, yeah. So as Tristan was alluding to, a lot of my initial work with the project involved contacting as many other people as possible who were involved with congressional outreach and getting their insights, right? And so for me, that involved talking to a lot of different people, including in a few AI policy organizations that have been meeting with congressional staff directly, as well as some of my contacts in the kind of pre-existing advocacy space, who have been meeting with Congress for longer before AI policy was really even a thing, because this is such a new domain, right?
Right.
Anyway, I asked them, a bunch of questions about not only the effectiveness of congressional outreach, but like what some of the optimal strategies were, how to best get your voice heard when you're speaking with a member of Congress, what resonates with people, and so on. I think Tristan might have more insight into these findings here later on, kind of at the conclusion of the project, but there were some initial common findings that basically most of the advocates I talked to agreed upon. One was the importance of personalization, right? It is, a lot of organizations do this thing where they ask people to send out like a template letter. Like, you may have seen this, you go on their website, there's a template letter, with like all the same language, and you click on a button, and that automatically gets sent to their congressional office or their
Right.
district office, right? That's non-optimal, because imagine being a congressional staffer on the other end and seeing like 20 of these template letters get in. You're just going to think, oh, well, a bunch of people clicked a button, so what? Whereas,
Right.
if you have those 20 people taking the time to write a thoughtful letter about why artificial intelligence concerns them, how it's impacted their lives, what their worries are, and what kinds of policies they want to address that, that's going to be a lot more impactful. And that was like a common finding that I discovered amongst the people that I talked to give one example.
Okay, so from the skeptic, I'm not saying that I am this, but I'm just trying to really tease out, like what's going on here. From a skeptic point of view, I think, but like, is anyone actually going to read it?
Yes, this is another really interesting thing that we found. So if you look at the makeup of congressional offices, you have, Tristan, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but you have several staff in a given congressional office, and each staff member is tasked with different things. And one thing that we found is that very consistently, congressional staff do actually review the communication that they get on a weekly basis. Something like 80 to 90% of congressional offices have staff members reviewing the communication that's coming in on a weekly basis. Now, it might not look like that from our end because, especially on a federal scale, we often think of congressional offices as being somewhat detached from constituent interests. I mean, you could just look at like approval rating of Congress to determine our current conception of like pessimism.
But to be fair, compare like current approval rating of the Supreme Court to the current approval rating of the Congress, and then you're like, oh, they're actually doing pretty well.
Right. And, one interesting thing is that if you look at polling, and this is maybe a slight diversion, but you can ask people, like, what is your perception of Congress overall? And they'll usually rate it negatively. But then you ask people, what's your perception of your own congressperson? And they'll rate it, on average, a lot more positively.
Interesting.
So anyway, the point is that there are congressional staff like who actively review the letters and phone calls that come in. And there's importance in volume here, numbers. Like, if you can get, for instance, 50 people from a given state to write to their senator in a given, let's just say, 1 or 2 week time span, that'll register on the on the office side of things, right?
Because now it's more like you're playing a numbers game of like, how many times can we ping this sort of area of interest in this one congressional person who's reading all of these letters. Like, the more volume you get in that of like a certain topic, the more likely it is that that's going to be brought up with more importance.
Exactly. Yeah. Another benefit here. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, one thing that I will mention just specifically on your question there, Jacob, is the basic whether or not you're going to get heard does depend on how you choose to communicate. So, for example, letters and emails, I think, if I recall correctly, I think every office that has been polled will process these in some form. But change it to phone calls, and then I think it's 80% of offices will log the phone calls, but that means 20% of offices will essentially pick up the phone, say, hey, how you doing? Hear your message, hang up the phone, and then that's it. You still, and we can get into this later, there's still a chance that you can bring about change there, but it is more limited in this sort of case when you stand a chance, to not get marked down, essentially.
Okay. So that to me, that says, and this might be a little bit of a divergence, but I'm good to keep going on it because I think it's a good direction for the conversation. To me, that says, okay, well then why would I call? What am I gonna do with calling? Like, is there a reason to call ever, or should I just never call?
Yeah, well, we'll certainly have to get into the sort of pros and cons of each form of communication, because this is each does sort of carry unique pros and cons. But to try to quickly surmise the call, calling in a sense is perhaps even easier to do than writing an email or a letter.
Not for Gen Z.
Potentially,
Gen Z won't do it.
yeah,
Gen Z will say, "I don't feel like I can like call on the phone," and then they'll freak out about having to order on the phone. I know because my girlfriend does this.
yeah.
I have to order everything.
The phone calls certainly have lost a bit of popularity over time. Um, so yeah, that's true. But yeah, I think I don't know. I think that the reason that you
So
can
this is another hit against the phone calls, basically. Like we can just get rid of them. They're useless.
we're saying goodbye to the phone calls now.
Yeah, get it out of here.
I would make the case for them to still be for them to still be a part of it. I think that
Okay.
yeah, I think that forming a proper ranking of which you should use is hard to do, and we didn't come to a full consensus on that. But I will say that like it seemed clear to us that emailing / sending a letter is the best thing you can do, and emailing is probably just the best thing you can do. So that's like if we're giving you a tagline for like this is the method you should use, it's email. But marking that, phone calls do seem like they carry this competitive advantage of making things very simple. It's facilitating the process of having a conversation rather than having to write down a sort of well-formulated written piece that articulates your views. So in a way, you could argue that it's more natural. Like I would say, for example, that if I were encouraging my grandmother to do this, I would probably ask her to make a phone call before I would ask her to send an email, because I think an email would actually be a higher barrier for her in terms of just articulating herself well through that medium, versus if I give her a phone number and say, now you still have to prepare beforehand. It's not to say that you should just go into the phone call not having thought about this at all. But if she thinks about it a little bit and then can just call someone, I think she's much more apt to do that. So maybe a way to put it is the different forms of communication will meet different people with where they're at and what their preferences are, in a way that it's hard to say that any one method is just like better than others. Even though phone calls do have that solid negative of like some offices don't log them, right? So that is a solid negative.
Mm-hmm.
That is a solid markdown in general, but there are still use cases, I think.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Felix, were you going to say something there?
No, Tristan, you covered about what I was going to say. I will just add, though, and maybe we can talk more about this later, but there's also immense value in actually scheduling meetings with congressional staff as well. And the online tool that we built does include a guide on how to do this.
Okay, wait, spoilers. You can't just
just
say that
sorry.
now. No, I'm just kidding. There's an online tool. It'll be linked in the show notes. And it's great. I looked at like the demo a couple weeks ago and it looked really good already, so I'm sure it's improved. But we'll talk much more about that later. So I guess the next step is more just like well, actually wait, we skipped the literature research review. What were those results or findings, or like how did you go about it? Were there any strategies either in how you conducted it or like how you researched things, tools you used, or also just like findings?
Yeah, so certainly one, something that I personally would like to improve on is trying to manage that process at a higher level, because it was a bit more piecemeal than I would have liked it to have been. But we did have some focus. So one of our team members was exclusively focused on basically scouring the academic literature for anything that seemed like it could be related. So he spent his time on all of the Google Scholar and similar list of research publication sites, trying to query with different keywords and looking to see if he could find anything that was related. I took a bit of a different path where basically I latched on to just a couple of resources and just sort of followed them through, largely through their citations, what they reference to and such. So this sometimes took me into the academic literature as well, but it was more sort of on the perimeter of it. So I started with basically there is this one group that put out a number of reports on congressional on communicating with your Congress member, and I think they started putting out these reports back in 2007. So there was 10 or some of those.
Quite a few.
Yeah, quite a few, and attacking different aspects of it each time. But they are sort of where they captured this sort of first piece of information, which is the first bit that I found to indicate that this might be promising, which was they basically queried offices and said, it would be good for me to have the specific terminology here, but it was something like, how many pieces of communication does your office need to receive to consider taking the action requested? So that's basically how many times do you need to see someone say X before you actually think about doing X? And there were a remarkable amount of offices that said less than 50.
Tristan actually followed up on this to verify the numbers and came back with an even stronger statement. The real statistic is that around 70% of congressional offices polled said that less than 50 instances of personalized messages would be enough to consider taking the action requested by those messages, while only 16% said that the same volume of template messages would be treated similarly. However, the survey which informs these numbers was conducted in 2011, almost 15 years ago. So I did some research to contextualize this number a bit more. In a subsequent report published by the same group, the Congressional Management Foundation, I found some important context. First, constituent communication has substantially increased since these numbers were recorded. In 2011, the number of messages a typical congressional district would receive was around 48,000. In 2017, that number had increased to 123,000. Now, it doesn't appear that the same questions were asked to the congressional offices at that time, which is somewhat annoying since we can't do a direct comparison, but we can use some collected information as reference. When asked if your member or senator has not already arrived at a firm decision on an issue, how much influence might the following advocacy strategies directed to the Washington office have on their decision? 92% of responses indicated that an individualized email would have at least some positive influence, with roughly a third of those making the stronger claim that an individualized email would have a lot of positive influence. Notably, this was the third most valuable advocacy intervention, behind only in-person issue visits from constituents and contact from constituents' representatives. In the same survey, only 56% of responses said that a form email would have at least some positive influence, and less than 1/10 of those said such emails would have a lot of positive influence. Based on this, I'm thinking that the value of form emails decreased from 2011 to 2017, but personalized messages stayed roughly the same in terms of impact. So, as the number of total communications from constituents to Congresspeople increased, the value of the forms decreased, probably because there are a lot more of them than there are of the personalized messages. So, if you buy my argument here, and then we also say that this trend continued, we would be able to assume that currently the form message has little to no impact, but the personalized message has retained most of its value.
And so this was a number of years ago. I think this was from 2017. But this is a fairly promising finding, that in under 50 emails, you can get an office to at least consider, maybe supporting this bill may make sense, or it at least becomes a potential topic on their agenda. So yeah,
Gotcha.
but yeah, so I started with those reports, and then just worked my way through after that. So that involved, there actually was sort of one thesis written that looked at a number of these different like a decent bit of the literature, and tried to pull from a number of different places, as well as surveying congressional staffers as part of it itself. And so that was mainly where I focused. And then we had some other team members that sort of blended between the two different sides. So some other people hopped in to do some of their own sort of prodding, and following up on resources that they had been given or mentioned to in person. But basically that was the brunt of it, was hitting the research hard and trying to find anything relevant, and then attacking good resources and running through their citations. It's the focus.
Gotcha. And then, so now you said that was like the first portion. What was the second portion of the project then?
Yeah, so we finished that up, and we knew we wanted to collate that into a write-up. We wanted to sort of get a more concise summary of what we had found out into the world, so people could see this, and if people were curious about this in the future, they could look at this and say, oh, okay, that seems like that's where this is at currently.
And is that out?
Yeah, that's out. Easiest link is on the EA forum.
But there was still more after that, right?
Right. So we did that, and then the juncture there. So I put multiple juncture points in the project, and I was very clear in the beginning that if our research indicated strongly that this was not an effective method, then we would leave it there. We would do the write-up. People would know for the future, and they could know that this isn't somewhere that they should focus their time. So the goal after doing that write-up was then to evaluate, okay, when we look at all of this, what do we think? Do we think that there's a case to be made for this as something worth focusing on? And we walked through a number of considerations, but basically, like Felix was saying earlier, we thought that there are a number of stories of a number of anecdotes from congressional staffers specifically saying yes, we received this one letter, and it was so compelling that I made sure to hand deliver it to the representative, and the representative was glad to receive it, for example. And there are examples in the literature of people organizing sort of larger groups to message their members, and sort of change actually occurring as a result of that, in a way that we're looking at correlation here, so we can't be certain. But then on top of that too, there was this state level data that we encountered as well, that sort of indicated that on the state level, when you get a number of people to write to their legislator, and sort of randomly select which ones receive it, which ones don't, that does consistently lead to increased support in the direction of the requested action.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So even though we didn't find sort of robust, you
didn't get a p-value.
We didn't get a p-value. We didn't get to find the study that said, hey, we care about X issue, and we randomly assigned Congress members to receive communication about X issue and not. And it turns out that they all changed their minds once they received communication. No, we found nothing like this. But we found enough data that added together with the fact that this is something that is easy to do and scalable. We found enough that we decided in the end that it seems like this is something worth following out into the next stage.
Okay, that makes sense to me. So you've got to this point, you've written this up, you say this is actually worth looking into, so we're going to facilitate this process and make it easier, because basically you can right now. You could write an article encouraging people to do this. Good. Oh, yeah. I probably wouldn't be as good at that, but yeah.
You could do it. You could put it out. And some people, you would have probably at least one person who would do it. right? But
I guess.
oh, you gotta be somewhat optimistic here. Someone's gonna do it.
Okay, sure.
But this isn't gonna capture, like, a number of people are unfamiliar with this process, and a number of people are like probably unconvinced by this too, unless they've also read our, so eloquently written post summarizing our research, which is definitely their highest priority. They may look at this and say, I don't know if that actually does cause change. Do I actually want to spend my time on this? So yeah, the theory.
It's boring.
Yeah, it's a little boring, like you've got to sit down, you got to really think about the issue and stuff.
I mean, unless you're like a good writer.
Yeah, if you're a good writer, or if you just particularly like getting riled up and talking to people, those are some easy candidates. But yeah, so we thought, we would like for there to be a way for this to be. We don't want to form sort of a facilitation of people sending form messages where they just sign up and hit send. This is too easy. This is like arguably like corrupting the overall process. This is not good. But we do want to make it easier, right? We do want there to be a low barrier to entry, and we want for people who are confused to be able to opt into guidance, to be able to opt into, oh, okay, I should think about this in my message. I should then think about this. I should then put in why, like sort of building it up based on the sort of, pointers that we encountered in our research for what makes a good message.
Is there sort of like I would assume that the effect of having multiple messages that were largely the same would basically amount to having one message, where like what matters is the unique count, like the count of unique messages that are sent, not the count of total messages sent. Did you get a sense of like whether that's true or not?
This is one thing that I think our final product did emphasize, is the importance of telling a personal story and explaining why you as an individual citizen care about artificial intelligence. In other words, you could say, I'm an artist and I've already been screwed over by generative AI that's taken my livelihood, and I want the government to do something about it. Or you could say, I'm a machine learning researcher and the systems that we're building, we literally don't know how to control, and we should probably do something about that as a government, or whatever. Like, the importance is telling a personal story, because then it makes it so much likelier that whichever overworked staff member or intern at the end of a long shift is reading that in a congressional office, remembers what you are saying, and conveys that information to their boss, right? If everything is just a generic template, it is more likely to get lost in a very large stack of paperwork. But if you find a way to make your story stand out and explain why you as a citizen care about this issue, you are way more likely to be remembered and to actually be received by the lawmaker in question.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I think that's really good to like highlight as well. Back to like the next step, kind of just rounding out that project. So you decided, okay, we're gonna make this tool. What did that look like?
Yeah, so we debated for a bit what the best way to go about this was. Do you create a web page? If you create a tool, where and what sort of should you use to facilitate that tool? In the end, we settled on guided track, mostly because one of our team members had experience with this in the past. And guided track is basically just I think it was initially sort of designed for people doing just sort of survey, like research that involved surveys of people. So it just makes sort of more interactive or in-depth sort of surveys possible. But then it's also an infrastructure which allows you to, sort of easily, so with like very limited coding knowledge, be able to build a tool that can be a bit more interactive, basically. So like, for example, one reason we chose guided track is we expect to be receiving, we expect potentially 2 people to show up to this tool. One, and obviously there are more dimensions that you
Wait,
could.
2 people total?
2 people in total, maybe 3. No. So we expect 2 types of people in one sense to show up to the tool. And yeah, one of them we think is like, kind of knows what they like they have enough to say, so it's not that they need help coming up with stuff to say. They just want to like get some of the tips, or they just are like a little skeptical, so they want to like hear a bit about like what we've sort of found through the research. And so for this sort of group of people, we don't want to be an impediment to them writing to their congressional member. We want to give them some of the stuff that we found, but then we want to help facilitate them writing this basically as quickly and as effortlessly as possible. For another group of people, we expect them to show up and they're more just like curious / uncertain and like don't really know what they want to write. And for this group of people, we want them to have a process that can help them out along the way, that can help them brainstorm as well as actually write the piece. So yeah, that's one of the distinctions made in the program, is eventually you can choose between this sort of streamlined or guided process that hopefully can help better meet the needs of the people that will actually want to use the tool.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So because we're on the tool now, maybe we can just go over that a little bit more. Like, what does it look like? What does the process look like in general? Yeah.
So basically, starting with the tool, the first decision that you'll make is sort of what form of communication would you like to continue with. And so we give you, we have like a landing page. So you start with a landing page and then go to this. But then, we have some of the information there. We've provided on the pros and cons we found for each different type. But then...
And what are those?
Yeah, so basically it's what I already told you with one further addition. So you've got handwritten letters, you've got emails, phone calls, congressional meetings, and then some meetings with your congressperson, and then social media.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we then have advice tailored to each of these. So once you've made this choice, we have further advice tailored to each of these pathways that can help you. For example, as a general rule, you want to prepare to be able to articulately explain how the issue connects with you, tell a personal story, but also what you would like them to do as a result. So there are commonalities between all the methods, but at the same time there are specifics. So if you want to do an in-person meeting, you need to be prepared to basically present a lot more content than you need to be when you're writing an email, for example, because you're potentially going to need to be able to monologue about AI and its risks for 15 minutes, if that's what you're meeting with your congressional member to do. And this, so there are different sort of things that you'll want to do based on the different methods. So then once you've chosen that, you'll then be taken to a page where you will be able to look up your congressional members and sort of input into the program which ones it is that you want to contact, just to keep record of it. And then from there, you'll choose what sort of risk you want to focus on. So this is one area that we're hoping to continue developing that's not as fully developed yet, but we hope to eventually have some more tailored guidance based on each individual risks, or at least be able to link to ways to dive into those further risks. But Felix, for example, has written sort of pros and cons of the different types of risks. So you can kind of learn a little bit about each of them with some examples, and then also some pros and cons of focusing on each. And so then, you'll choose your risk. And for some people, this may be very easy. For some people, they may come in and they may say, I'm an artist. What I'm concerned with is the potential risk that AI poses to creatives. But other people will be less sure. They'll have more of a motivation of, I'm worried about AI, but I don't know what exactly. And this can help them refine that a bit.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Yep. And then you'll choose that, and then you'll go through the preparation process for your given, your chosen form of communication. So then you'll prepare for your meeting. You'll prepare the notes for your call. You'll start writing your email, for example. And then, yeah.
Okay. And then, so just like going back to the personal framing of it, based on like my understanding of what you guys have said, then if I'm wanting to do good outreach, like what I do is I find an anecdote that has applicability. So it's not like it's only going to happen to me necessarily. Like it has to be, somewhat plausible. But then still definitely like personalized to me around my scenario. And then I pitch that, basically. I say like, hey, here's this thing. This is how it's affecting me. And that is what will make in the end. And then you also add like, statistics and whatever. But like the main sort of, you need to sell them on the idea first. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think Felix can say some more here too. But one thing I will note is that basically we think that just, someone who's thought about this and is concerned and wants to take a few minutes to contact their member should do it. We think that that's good, and they have a number of different ways they can do that. And there are a number of different aspects that make up the ideal message. And so which parts you add in will depend on, for example, what risk you choose. So for example, one other very solid piece of advice that's consistent throughout the literature is making a specific ask. So if you just write like this, I'm Jacob, I'm really concerned about AI and its chance for misinformation. It connected to me in X way. And then you cut the letter there. This isn't that helpful, because then they can write down, Jacob's concerned with misinformation. That's great. What are we going to do about it?
There's no suggestion. It's bringing a problem without bringing a solution.
Exactly. And bringing that problem and highlighting your concern is better than nothing. Like that, we want to be clear about that. But the best message will also bring an ask. And so if you are concerned with AI and its overlap with misinformation, maybe you can ask them to support one of the bills to ban the use of sort of deepfake technology in political campaigns, which is live in Congress right now.
All right. So there are a ton of these, and I linked to many in the show notes, but I couldn't find a single source which was sufficiently comprehensive, nor one which had all of the features that I would want. Regardless, here's my best attempt to summarize the status of AI-related legislation as of February 9th, 2025. Over 120 AI-related bills are in various stages of the legislative process, multiple of which address deepfake technology. Out of these, the deepfake bill that has the most traction is the Take It Down Act, which requires platforms to take down non-consensual sexually exploitative imagery, including AI-generated deepfakes, within 48 hours of notice. This one has bipartisan support and is kind of a no-brainer, but hey, at least it's something. The other 120 bills span many domains, including risk management, education and workforce development, transparency, national security, and one, the Creating Resources for Every American to Experiment with Artificial Intelligence Act, or the Create AI Act, even allocates a bunch of money to creating federally funded AI, seemingly both compute and data, to be used for research and public access. This one also seems likely to pass, or at least it did, until Trump's favorite corporate man-child started defunding well-established institutions left and right. On a lighter note, you may have also picked up on the acronym in that name. It seems that the Senate is just as much a fan of acronyms as the aerospace industry, so I went through and found some of my favorites. Note that this is based solely on the absurdity of the acronym and not the content of the bill. At number 5, we have the No AI Fraud Act, where fraud stands for fake replicas and unauthorized duplications. At number 4, we have the Deepfakes Accountability Act, where deepfakes stands for defending each and every person from false appearances by keeping exploitation subject to. Then we have the Defiance Act, where defiance stands for disrupt explicit forged images and non-consensual edits. At number 2, we have the Quiet Act, where quiet stands for quashing unwanted and interruptive electronic telecommunications. And then my favorite, the Are You Real Act, where R and U are both the letters, and the whole thing stands for restriction on utilizing realistic electronic artificial language. Yeah, so I had a little bit of fun with that. Long story short is that there is no shortage of bills which you can ask your congressperson to support. Check out the trackers in the show notes and find one you like.
And I just threw a lot of...
So it's not just suggestions, it's concrete, like doable suggestions is the North Star.
Yeah. The North Star is a bill that they can like vote yes on or vote no on or generally support to bring out of committee, for example. Even more ideally vote yes or no, but also potentially bring out of committee. Especially if they're in the relevant committee, right? So for example,
Right.
if there's a bill currently stuck in a committee that they're a part of, this is a great opportunity to write them to say like, hey, I think this bill like really stands a chance to address the issue in an important way. I really encourage you to bring it on the floor to a vote to support this bill. And then, yeah, there are some other factors of good messages that we can get into as well. But yeah, personalizing and making a specific request, those are the really big ones that every message should strive to do ideally.
Okay. Yeah, Felix, do you have anything to add there, and also just expanding more on like how do you do a good message, or like how am I effective in this? And obviously there isn't necessarily just one way either, but like what are the options that I have?
Yeah, well, we came up with a crafty little acronym about this. One of our team members
really?
came up with this. Yeah. And
Nice.
the acronym is STAMP.
Okay.
And it stands for short, thoughtful, actionable, memorable, and personalized. So going through this briefly, short, congressional staff don't have a ton of time on their hands. They're probably not going to read a 50-page manifesto you send them, but they'll read a one-page letter. Thoughtful, you want to appeal to the concerns and interests of the congressperson, and you want to know how their concerns interact with what you have to bring. So for instance, as Tristan mentioned, if a congressperson is on a given committee, you can work that into your message. You can say Congressperson X is on the Senate Committee of Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and that has to do with technology and science, and so they might be more likely to support AI legislation, and here's what I'm going to ask. So that's thoughtful. Actionable, as Tristan said, you want to have a clear and precise ask. The more specific, the better. There might not always be a bill that you're pushing for, but at the very least, you should say like you should take action to prevent the use of deepfakes, or you should take action to prevent the proliferation of like the largest AI models, or whatever it is that you're asking them to do. Like include that as a specific request. That's A for actionable. Memorable, you want to find a way to make your message stand out. And personalized, as we've already said, you want to explain why you as a constituent care about this. So yeah, STAMP, put a stamp on your letter before sending it in.
Nice. That's catchy. Okay, cool. So I guess before I like shift, because I had another question, but is there anything else you guys want to add about this area?
Yeah, one other thing that I wanted to mention was the importance of batching. So we talked about this need to personalize and aspects of good message. But one thing that's important to note is that when you're personalizing the message and when you're trying to get across this connection to the issue, you're playing what can be thought of maybe as the emotional game. You're trying to get someone to notice what you're saying and connect with it so that then sticks with them and comes back up later on in the opportunities they have to influence the policy of the office. But the formal process does not always lend itself to actually taking into account these factors. And so for the formal process, what happens with a lot of offices is they'll do weekly reports based on the communication they receive. So this means that they will basically, and this varies between offices. So this is really just capturing what the majority of offices do, because not even all of them do weekly reports. But the normal office will receive your message, and a staffer, they'll basically put this into a sort of management system they have for all of this communication. And the person logging this will basically mark down sort of what issue your message is connected to.
In their My First Democracy leapfrog, right?
Yeah. So
okay,
they'll mark that down there, and in their lovely, fully updated system that definitely doesn't also involves constituent communication sometimes getting lost, which is another problem. But anyways, they will, they'll mark this down there, and how they then work this into the weekly reports can depend, but often what they'll do is they'll mark down AI, concerned about risk from AI or something like that. They'll have a risk from AI and they'll have a count beside that. And this point in the process introduces the importance of batching, or basically of trying to send in messages within ideally within a week, but also just in a more condensed period of time to try to also achieve impact or a chance at impact through this formal process. Because some of them will only, or I think it actually is potentially the majority of offices, will only take the top number of issues. It varies depending on the office. Some will just do top 3, for example, but then I think some will go as far as top 25. I think the average is something more like top 6 or something like that. But the number of issues that make it into these weekly reports can sometimes be limited. And so if you are the only person writing to your office, writing to your Congress member's office about risk from AI, there is a chance that you get washed out in this formal process. So when it's possible, coordinating with others to send at the same time, especially when you're sending to the same representative, is really helpful. And this mostly will come from a larger sort of involvement of a sort of movement being built up around this and someone that can coordinate this. But one sort of very straightforward piece of advice is if a relevant bill to the risk you are concerned with has come out, trying to write about that as soon as possible and encourage your Congress member to support that is a sort of solid time to organize. And so, it's just something to be mindful of, that if you want to try to play into this formal process, the numbers game is quite important and can be the difference between.
So if I am a person who doesn't, follow the congressional briefings that I'm sure happen tell us about bills, I don't know. How do I find out when a bill has been created or started or whatever?
So there are websites tracking AI legislation in Congress. The most solid way is looking on one of these trackers and then seeing what overlap there is there between the issue that you're concerned with and what's currently in Congress or in committees or on the floor for a vote.
Yeah, I guess one thing I wanted to briefly discuss is how this area fits into the overall landscape of advocacy.
Yes.
So, right, what we are focused on is constituent communication, right? Encouraging everyday citizens to make their voices heard. And one reason this is so effective is that it fits into an overall strategy. And sometimes political people call this like inside game and outside game. So inside game is what you could consider lobbying, right? This is like policy experts meeting with members of Congress and talking about policy proposals in some detail, right?
The anti-democracy part. Got it.
Well, yeah, I mean, depending on who the experts are, but like there are
Inside
people
game.
there are people who have good policy ideas who convey those ideas by having meetings with congressional staff. There are, on the other hand, like people like for instance, Meta has hired about 30 lobbyists in the U.S., which is not ideal, right? But
wait. Let's do a pause on this because I think this is relevant. Like,
sure.
What does that mean in terms of money for Meta and like time input for Meta, and then also relative, like to what, how many lobbyists there are, for example, like it just to contextualize this, because like 30, that's a pretty small number as far as Meta's concerned. So, but what does it actually mean?
Yeah, fair enough. So it's a small number as far as Meta is concerned. It's a worryingly large number compared to the AI safety community.
Okay.
I think I would say with some level of confidence that the AI safety community does not currently have 30 full-time lobbyists across multiple organizations, let alone just in one. And then you add Meta, Google, Amazon, possibly some of the AI companies in the coming years. I wouldn't be surprised if they got more direct about their lobbying efforts. And you have a situation where technology companies are just exerting increasing amounts of influence in the political process. And they're primarily using the inside game strategy to do that, right? They don't have a bunch of boots on the ground. They're not contacting citizens and asking them to get involved. They're relying on their money and their lobbyists. So where we come in partially, I mean, to be clear, there are AI safety lobbyists too who are helping to counteract that influence.
Yes.
And they're
Wait,
doing
but
great
I'm
work.
sorry. This is I want to stick on this forward. Like, how many lobbyists exist?
Alright, so I'm gonna skip a bit of this part because I got really interested in this one tangent and pulled Felix down with me. So instead of going down that rabbit hole together, I decided to do research and go down it myself and then just report the findings. Figured that would be a little bit more efficient. So, according to Open Secrets, a site which reports on US political funding, the number of lobbyists on Capitol Hill hit an all-time high in 2024, with around 13,000 individuals employed, and total lobbying spending was around $4.3 billion US dollars. Sources have Meta spending the most out of the big tech companies, with around $20 million US dollars spent per year for the past 5 years, and 65 lobbyists this year. That's one for every 8 members of Congress. Other big funders include Alphabet, Google's parent company, Microsoft, ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, and Amazon. Although OpenAI is just now getting into the big leagues of undermining democracy, they sure have picked up steam recently, spending a total of $1.76 million US dollars in 2024, which is around 7 times as much as the amount they spent in 2023. And it's not just the US. Big tech tops spending for lobbying in Europe, with a concrete example being their last-minute push to water down the EU AI Act. I also want to note that these numbers are likely understatements for the amount of money actually invested into lobbying by big tech. Indirect lobbying, or so-called dark money, is when a company pays to a group, say a trade association like NetChoice, which Amazon, Alphabet, Meta, and X are all a part of, or independent think tanks, and then those organizations lobby at the behest of their funders. On top of that, some states have little to no regulation on the mandatory reporting of lobbying, creating another path for big tech to have an unfair say in deciding public policy. When taken in combination with the fact that there are over 120 bills in Congress which are not yet fully defined, but which will assuredly impact these tech bros and their stakeholders, their actions make perfect sense. The goal is corporate capture, and they're already basically there.
Is it like a big? I'm just more curious than anything about like how much money is this one company willing to put into this? Like how much money is at stake for them? Because it's got to be massive in order to want to do this kind of like level of influencing.
So there's a Time article that came out, which maybe we can link to in the podcast description, and it discussed the role of big tech and its lobbying efforts related to AI policy. And what that tells me is that one of the things that we should be focusing on as AI advocates is not only, well, obviously having like inside game to counter the effect of these enormous tech companies lobbying, but also making sure that we encourage constituent communication to Congress and making sure that people who are concerned about AI do contact their elected officials. Because, and I'll just, maybe we can add another link here to some polling information, but the majority of Americans are pretty concerned about AI. And there have been polls finding that a majority of Americans think that AI companies shouldn't be trusted to regulate themselves, that there should be additional safeguards put in place, that the government should do more related to the regulation of AI industries. Now, the details of what that looks like are to be determined. But in principle, there's a lot of potential public support for this, and I think it's a good idea to try to encourage that as a means of counteracting the kind of pure inside game approach that the big tech companies are taking here.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Thank you for going on that tangent with me.
Yeah, of course.
I felt like it was relevant. Yeah. Okay. That definitely makes sense. Okay. So.
Sorry, I will say the one last thing I wanted to add just in that previous section. I think we actually pretty well covered a lot of the hallmarks of a good message. But like Felix mentioned, the stamp method gets a lot of those important bits. The only other thing that I wanted to flag that we did find was potentially useful is being thankful. It's a real simple thing. It's a real uncommon thing. It's just like and how much you can scale how much you want to focus on this, but like being able to at the very least end your message with like something more than just like a thanks is solidly good. But also taking a little bit of time, of course, short is something that's important here, being short, but also spending a couple sentences saying, I really appreciated what you did on X other issue. I felt that like really represented my needs as your constituent, and I felt like you were looking out for us there. So I think being thankful is another important hallmark here. And I did remember one more thing, which is kind of just a subcategory of one of the other ones, but connecting it to you personally is very good. Also connecting it to your community is similarly very good and important. So this is less relevant if you're contacting your senator, because your community will then be the whole state, or what they're representing is then the whole state. But you could talk about its effects at a state level, especially if you're familiar with multiple parts of the state or something like that. But especially when contacting your representative, the congressperson who serves for you in the House of Representatives in your specific district, talking about how the issue impacts your local community is another useful frame to put in your message. They're also very concerned with this.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe I like even more so than like the personal ones too, because if you can demonstrate that the community is being affected, that's more people that are being affected as well, but it's still like in a specific instance.
Yeah, and some of the people that can be most influential here are people that are familiar with the broader community. Like if you serve some sort of leadership role within your community and you're familiar with what other people think, like you can have an outsized impact on conveying concerns to your member of Congress, especially if you meet with them at a meeting and you're able to bring sort of testimonies from some of the people you know within the community and how they've been affected. So yeah, definitely. I think if you have that connection, focusing on that connection is yeah, a really important way you can add value.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. So the next area that I wanted to sort of touch on was, and just also keeping in mind that we have, we're going to want to start winding down, but I think that we have sort of hit the, like, why is this important? How are we going to do it? So what were like your difficulties on the project, or things that were, like problems that arose, intricacies that you weren't expecting, things that surprised you, anything like that?
Yeah, I can start with just some small things, which is as mentioned earlier, but maybe I didn't clarify, maybe I didn't emphasize it enough. Like, there's just not a lot of research out there on this topic. Like there are a number studies could be designed in a pretty like I can at least imagine a study that could be well executed, that if well executed would give us a lot of the information we want here, and just none of those have been done on the federal level.
So like, wait, pause real quick. If you're out there and you're thinking, I have this money burning a hole in my pocket and I really want to know this answer, contact Tristan, because he has an idea already.
I've got the idea. I've got the state level experiments that we can look at, and then contact with people who were the research leads on there, and then try to envision something that can be deployed at the federal level that could then try to suss out more concretely what is the actual effectiveness here.
Gotcha. Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
It would be it would be a lot to set up, but I think it's at least like it's at least like possible. Like there's nothing impossible about doing the same thing at a federal level. It is more money, and you do also need to be able to lay.
Isn't it always?
Of course. But yeah, so there not being a lot of research out there was kind of hard, because that made deciding if this was worthwhile harder to do, because you have to pay attention to just a bunch of smaller pieces of less sure evidence, or like sometimes conflicting evidence and stuff, to then be able to like pull into one coherent picture of like, do we actually think that this is a method that's potentially worth looking at? Does it seem plausibly, from what we know, worthwhile? So yeah. That was I think one of the early difficulties.
Felix, do you have any?
No, I think that just about covered it.
Okay. Yeah. So this was a pretty easy project.
I mean, the other thing that I could mention is, I personally do not have a lot of experience like leading research projects, right? So like a personal difficulty for me was definitely figuring out how to best execute the project, and especially when I don't fully have all the experience myself to do so. And what worked out really nicely is that we had a number of people at sort of different stages in their career, and so by just having a flat hierarchy where there was, in some meaningful senses, I was still leading the project, but in other meaningful senses, this was more of a group-led project, because I wasn't issuing, very specific directives for what each person should be doing each week with their time. People had a lot of autonomy to sort of figure out, okay, here are the clear needs of the project. Here's how I'm going to address those. Here's how I can add to that. So that definitely comes, figuring that out, figuring out how to best execute that takes some work. It was definitely a difficulty, but I think, yeah, I think we were able to figure out a fairly good balance with it.
Nice.
So, and I guess another difficulty worth mentioning here, because yeah, maybe we should say it wasn't a fully easy project. So we need to paint the picture a little more. Yeah, another problem that we had is when we were making the final product, we needed to use, or we wanted to use a lot of resources to explain these issues and for people to reference to and things as such. And we actually ran into a fairly consistent difficulty here of not having a lot of the resources we'd like to reference to that make the very like simplistic case for a given subcategory of risk to the common person. It's very hard to know where you should direct someone who is concerned about AI and autonomous weapons, for example. And yeah, we really think that there's currently in the AI safety space a lack of literature that's sort of put into very simplistic language and put into easy to understand and quick to read sort of like facts and figures that people can reference.
That's what I would like to call accessible content.
Yes,
and that's what I try to make. And I do agree. I think it's largely missing in a lot, not just in the AI safety space, although it definitely is, but also a lot of other academic domains as well. And so that's something that I'm trying to work on improving for everyone.
Agreed. Although I will note very quickly, Pause AI does have some of this accessible content. We've made it a priority to try to make our content as accessible as possible. Yes. So if you go on the website, pauseai.info, there's an overview of the risks in a format that's attempting to be as clear and concise as is feasible.
Yeah, I think that's one of the better resources out there right now. They're just the thing is, there just aren't that many, and when you want to do something like this, like, you want to have a lot more, just because having different ways of demonstrating something is really valuable. So
yeah, and then the problem is you have people involved who can't speak like they would to a 5-year-old who have the feeling that they need to be too technical and can't even use simplistic language. So we just need to retrain these people.
Yeah, but we're on the way.
We're on the way, little by little.
So I guess let's go into. I have one more question that I would like to ask each of you, but first I wanted to give you the chance to do your call to action.
Yeah,
because there is a tool and it's pretty good, and so take it away.
Yeah, so we are going to be linking this tool on the podcast so that you guys have access to it, those watching. And again, we just want to really emphasize the importance of some of our findings, right? It is impactful to contact your elected officials. One finding that I take away from this is that you don't need to be working on, full time on AI safety, or you don't need to have a background in machine learning in order to have an impact. You can have an impact as a citizen. And I think now is the time to do that. So we're in a really interesting window here in terms of AI policy. There's been a surge of interest amongst policymakers in AI safety. So the U.S. AI Safety Institute was recently established. Bills related to misinformation and deepfakes are already being heard in Congress, right? There's this uptick in congressional interest, and we expect that to continue. We expect Congress to pay more attention to AI and introduce more policy measures. However, as I kind of alluded to earlier, we also expect other actors, including lobbyists working on the behest of AI companies, to try to downplay AI safety and to recommend watered down and biased policy recommendations, preventing meaningful change. And this is another reason why, as citizens, it's really important to contact Congress and make our voices heard, because we need the wisdom and the foresight to respond to these kinds of threats and ultimately to convince our leaders to act. And so if you're listening to this podcast and if you're concerned about AI safety, whatever that reason may be, we are strongly encouraging you to take a few minutes after you listen to this, use our website, and actually send a message to your elected official. It'll walk you through how to do that, and it'll allow you to send a real message to your congressperson, and you'll have made a significant impact on this.
Nice. Okay. Two things. The first, what was your least favorite part about either like the work you're doing in general or the work specifically on this project, or like a part that you just like you found really hard or disinteresting or however negative in some fashion?
I can go first, maybe. I think one thing that I find somewhat frustrating is the ambiguity of the ask. In other words, the ambiguity of what constituents are asking their policymakers to do. So again, the ideal version is that there are specific bills that are already introduced in Congress that constituents can contact their policymakers and ask to support. Unfortunately, there haven't been that many bills introduced in Congress yet. I mean, there have been a few. There have been a few related to misinformation and deepfakes. There have been a few others. I don't know the bill numbers off the top of my head. I apologize, but there has been some interest. But like one thing that I found frustrating is that just wishing that there had been more legislation introduced in Congress that people could directly ask their members of Congress to support. Because it could well be that depending on which cause area you're interested in within AI safety, there isn't yet like a concrete piece of legislation that's been introduced into the House or Senate, and that means that your ask is like a little bit more vague by necessity, which is frustrating. But again, just to reemphasize, it's still really valuable to contact your policymakers, even if there's not a bill on the agenda. Because it's a step in the right direction towards maybe one of those policymakers eventually introducing such a bill and going from there.
Nice. Okay, awesome. And Tristan, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Felix already had a pretty solid one. So the somewhat weak follow-up, I would say, is yeah, I mean, just because this is already fixated on something we've talked about. But yeah, I don't know. I was kind of frustrated by the fact that there wasn't much research out there on this. I just would like to know if this is effective, and I have, I feel pretty safe in knowing that I don't think many people are going to involve a ton of their time and are going to make significant life choices based on us sort of recommending this as something that they do. But yeah, I do have this like just sort of unsettledness that could be solved by there being higher quality research out there on whether or not this actually brings about change in what Congress members are thinking.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And now the opposite ask: what is your favorite part about like this work that you're doing, or the part that you've most enjoyed, or like a finding that was particularly satisfying? Like what is the positive side?
The positive side for me was at a general level just feeling like we were able to undertake a project that not only can help people out in the future who are potentially interested in deploying this method and learning about it as further advocacy efforts in the AI safety space take off, but also that I felt like, I felt like there's something, at least there's something really gratifying to me in focusing on the sort of like wider outreach and just trying to motivate people to contact their representative and just tell them that they're worried and they'd like something to like help address the issue. Like I think I am someone who I guess still believes in democracy. Haven't thrown it out the door yet, and so like in wanting to believe in that democratic ideal, I'm glad that we're at least trying to take a stab at helping that function and helping make use of, yeah, what I think is a good form of government when executed right. And the last thing I'll add is it's also just gratifying to yeah, work on a team together with some great people. I really enjoyed yeah, what everyone on the team brought to the table, and yeah, it was really great. It's really great just getting to see people also yeah, like taking up the idea and actually treating it seriously and trying to do good work on it. Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Felix, what about you?
I mean, Tristan covered a lot of what I was going to say. And I think, like Tristan, one of the really gratifying things for me was just knowing that this project could actually be useful in the real world in actually influencing AI policy. I'm gonna echo the similar sentiment. I'm very pro democracy. I am very pro citizens getting involved. I think democracy is one of the best ideas we've ever come up with as a species. And I don't like the idea of a very small number of AI companies essentially having in their hands the power to determine the trajectory we take over the next few decades without significant levels of citizen buy-in and significant levels of policy pushback, right? This is where I think citizen outreach and congressional communication is just so crucial, because it's our future that's being written, and we should be the ones who actually have a say in that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I would just like to, despite my pessimism in some regards, I couldn't agree more. And like, I think the work that you guys did and the work that you're doing is great. And that's part of the reason that I was so excited to have you guys on, so we could make sure that we could get this tool out to as many people as possible.
That's a wrap for this double interview on the Into AI Safety podcast. Now, there are a lot of updates since I last dropped an episode, but this one's already been pretty long, so I'll save them for a future one. If you liked this show or found it useful, please share it with all of your friends and consider following the show on Blue Sky or subscribing on your preferred listening platform so that you always know when a new episode drops. Big thanks to Chase Procopia, who is our amazing editor, and I'd also like to again thank Tristan Williams and Felix de Simone for joining me on the podcast and being incredibly kind about the delayed release. Better late than never, right?